evening, voters. Tonight's debate is very simple. Should there be caste-based reservation in private sector jobs? Is the question we are asking. We have reservation when it comes to government jobs. We're even debating reservation for promotions in government jobs. There's a crucial Supreme Court judgment lined up tomorrow. But even at this stage, there are thousands of posts in government departments which have gone unfilled for these specific reserved categories. On the other hand, the argument is that affirmative action is all about creating opportunities for those who've been oppressed, for those who've been targeted, for those who've been held back, for those who were not given an opportunity or their opportunities were stolen, snatched away for generations and centuries together. To correct all of those wrongs, should we open the doors in the private sector as well? But then what about merit? Should we instead focus on giving good quality education, even tuition for entrance exams if needed, and then let it be an open, equal field? These are some of the questions that we shall debate tonight. But first, here is Aarti Subramanian with the details of the news that actually has triggered this debate tonight.
Sources have confirmed to Mirror Now that on the 22nd of September, the PMO held a high-level meeting to examine the possibility of reservation in the private sector. Now, this is a highly contentious move, but the timing of this is extremely significant. The UPA government held 7 such meetings during its tenure, but this particular 8th meeting is the first under the Narendra Modi government. Now, this meeting comes at a time when we have just barely months to go before the general election. Also, coming at a time when there have been protests across the nation by various Dalit groups demanding jobs, demanding reservation, and also protests regarding the SC/ST Act alleged dilution. So the timing of this is extremely significant. And of course, this is a contentious issue given the fact that sections of the private sector are not really in favor and see it as an impingement or an infringement on their right to hire. So politically, this is a very significant move, and right ahead of the general elections, it is one that is going to be keenly watched.
Well, like Aarti was really telling us that it's not just specifically quota that the government may look at. There may be other things that can be done. There may be a renewed focus on some of the selected villages where there is a higher percentage of the SC/ST class. There may be special seats that could be reserved for training programs like the Skill India. There are different methods. What kind of affirmative action do we need? To what extent do we go and quota in private sector jobs? Is that what is really necessary? That is a big question we're asking this evening. Joining us tonight, Bhaskar Ghosh, leader of BJP, Hemant Sahal, he's the CEO for Colpol, Ashok Bharti, chairman of the All India Ambedkar Mahasabha, Ved Jain, former vice president of ASSOCHAM, Shailej Singh, a recruitment expert, and Vivan Sharan, partner with Cohn Advisory. We'll also have Yogendra Yadav joining us very soon. But let me first go across to the BJP representative and ask him this question. Where do you stand on this debate, Mr. Ghosh? Should we have quota in private sector jobs as well?
I believe that we have already, the highest office of the government, the Prime Minister's office, has clarified the matters that if there is a reservation, that reservation should be done after creating the conducive atmosphere. That means today we are talking about NCBC and they're asking for 27% reservation for the OBC. And this reservation to be given on a specific application-based area, number one. Number two, the logic is that if the private sector is also accountable and answerable to a larger mass, and this private sector is getting their own resources from different financial resources, human resources from this particular society, and as they are accountable to larger mass and to different authorities, to the different government, they are enjoying different concessions, they are enjoying tax havens, a lot of things they are enjoying. So they have this kind of responsibility to upliftment of the reserve category, of the women empowerment and other factors. So what we say basically is that the reservation is needed based on skills, applications and their eligibility. But at the same time, their accountability of the private sector to the different authorities, to the different bodies, is also to be accounting for, also to be to look into. So this is called the conducive atmospheres. So after creating the conducive atmosphere, the reservation should be applied. That is the government overall stand. Even the Bijay Sonkar Shastri and spokesperson from the BJP has also explained the same thing. So
but why do you, okay, let me just ask you a simple question. Why do you believe that there should be any kind of caste-based reservation, conducive atmosphere or not? How you go about it is, of course, can be discussed in further detail.
So first of all, as our constitution also gives the right and the possibility of protecting those larger masses which needs from SC, ST and Dalits and all. So that should be followed in the larger spectrum of doing business in this country.
Okay.
And at the same time, I give you one example, the CII, the SOCHM, they are also indirectly contributing to this particular reservation. For example, they have the data which CII has given that they have created lakhs of jobs through the skill developments, through doing this lot of social programs, upliftment programs, technical know-how, providing technical know-how. So we are not talking about that there should be abrupt reservation on SC, ST or OBC.
Sure.
But there should be an environment whether their empowerment should be protected. Their empowerment should be also facilitated in order to create a situations where they could compete at par with the other larger mass which are not getting the reservation. So we have to create a level playing field.
Fair enough. Now, based on our sources, what we've actually understood, and some of it you were also alluding to, the sense within some government officials and corridors of government is that the private sector is not so committed right now to the cause as the government would like it to see. We're also told that the officials who were present in the meeting have said that the government has prepared a list of about 22,000 villages where the percentage of SC, ST population is high. Government officials said that private sector can adopt villages and work towards extending skill training and then providing jobs to SC, STs in the villages. That's largely what also Mr. Ghosh is alluding to, a more conducive atmosphere. Is that the way to go forward, or should you just simply come out and announce some quota in private sector jobs in different categories and say, well, this is it, these are the number of positions you must fill and let's start with that right away? Those are the two options that we can look at. Let me get in some more views, very quickly go across our panel and just to get a sense of who stands where. Hemant Sahal, let's start with you. On which side of the debate do you stand?
Yeah, I think I am completely against reservations in the corporate sector. I think after, we have a very well-established reservation system in our education system, right? So even after 16 years of education, if you're not able to have a merit-based system in jobs, especially in private organizations, then I think we have to really look at our primary, secondary and education systems, because then they are failing us.
Okay, Hemant, we seem to have a bit of a problem with your feet. We're just going to try and fix that so that we can hear you better. Let me take that question across to Shailesh Singh and ask him that, Shailesh, where do you stand on this debate?
It's not that binary, Tanvi, but I would say that I surely stand for providing equity. I don't think equality as a concept is something that really exists in society. So we shouldn't stand for equality and say, hey, we should be all equal and hence no reservations or no quotas. But we should definitely provide equity, which means equal opportunity for all. And if that has to happen through reservation for certain jobs, I'm all for it. Now, I'm not saying we should offer quota and reservations for jobs which are a matter of life and death. So if it's a doctor's profession, if it's an airline pilot, no, those are not the jobs where you'd want to have reservations. But there are a plethora of jobs where corporates today are not able to fill roles. And I don't understand this hue and cry when somebody proposes a reservation, because you're anyways not able to find people for those jobs. So why not look at a pool which potentially is the right employee for you if you're wanting to invest in a little bit of training for that person and offer that individual an opportunity to make up for lack of that opportunity while they were growing up and studying, and they did not have the money or avenues to go to a good institute and get educated and compete for those jobs.
Vivan Charan, good evening to you. Do you agree that we should have provide these equal opportunities, have a pool of these people, because you have the jobs and you don't have the qualified people?
I think there are three major elements that we have to consider here. Firstly, obviously, we have a very large pool of informal and self-employed workers. I mean, a lot of self-selection is involved there. And therefore, what we need to look at, if we are looking at any form of affirmative action more broadly, is their ability to jump queues for public service delivery. What I mean by that is, if you look at any of these stratas of society, you would very easily see the differences in credit delivery, in public service delivery more generally to these strata. So I think the first thing is to look at how we can get public service delivery to these people more effectively, and how we can help them jump queues, even if it means in terms of licenses and so on and so forth. The second is, I think you can argue, and people have argued for a threshold-based system, where with a certain amount of scale, you become more responsible, which is the traditional CSR debate that has been had in our civil society. But what I think we need to do there, if we do have that debate, is to invert the accountability question a little bit as well, and look at the accountability of government to businesses in our country. And there my basic submission would be that we need a new public-private contract, where the government, like in the case of what is called the Essential Services Management Act, in certain states where the government is promising certain kinds of industry, 24 hours of power, 365 days of uninterrupted operations. If the government can create that sort of a contract with industry, then industry certainly has a responsibility towards delivery of some form of affirmative action.
Okay, so
and
incentive
lastly, I
based.
would say none of this should be done without evidence.
Right. Okay, I'll come back to you on that point. I'll keep some of your points for the later part of this debate as well. Quickly going across to our other panelists. Yogendra Yadav, good evening to you. And you've obviously done a lot of study and extensive work into this idea and whether or not it will help us, and what's the existing structure, or what percentage of the SC/ST and backward classes do actually get jobs in private sector. So what's your view? Is this the correct way to go forward, quota, or should we be looking at enabling them in other ways?
Tanvi, we should look at it in a more nuanced way. I think there are three different questions here. One is this a serious issue? Should the country be discussing? My answer is, of course, yes. Sadly, the previous government tried to confront it but lost its nerves. This government doesn't seem to have the will even to face this question. You know, to hold the meeting towards the end of your regime clearly shows non-seriousness about it. The second question is there a case for affirmative action of some kind? The answer is yes. Today, this afternoon, a very significant report on the employment. It's the State of Working India. I think that's what it's called. The report has been released, which once again gives evidence to show that the caste community-wise employment is very, very unequal, that those who come from hitherto disadvantaged sectors of society, SC/ST, OBC minorities, etc., are very severely underemployed in the respectable professions, in the higher professions, and they are overemployed in the menial and the lower class works. So yes, there is a case, and it is not purely merit which is governing it. It is determined by opportunities which are sadly very unevenly distributed in our society. The third question is, so what's the way out? What kind of affirmative action? To my mind, the moment we say we need affirmative action, We should not jump to saying, therefore, let's have reservation. No, there are large instruments. There was a committee of Government of India in 2007-8, and I was a member of that committee, which looked at this possibility of creating an equal opportunity commission. And my own thought is the following. Number one, make disclosures mandatory. Like in the US, every enterprise should be made to declare its social composition every year. It happens in the US, racial profile has to be disclosed every year. It's standard. Number two, give them incentives. Those industries, those enterprises that show greater social profile, diverse social profile, have greater proportion of persons from disadvantaged sections, especially in the white collar jobs, better jobs, give them incentive. Number three, if there are private enterprises that want government contract, that want government subsidies, want benefits from government, for them, make some kind of a quota mandatory, but only for them. Immediate overnight shift to a quota regime like in the government sector can actually go against this very significant measure. This measure needs to be brought in slowly, step by step, but we can make a beginning by, as I said, transparency, by incentives, and by certain regime of affirmative action enforced only on those who compete for government favors.
Right, but if you look at the data, Mr. Yogendra Yadav, when you see thousands of these posts, even in our government offices, are just lying vacant, they aren't being filled. So when we are not doing enough where we can, how is this going to help at all?
It is true that we are not doing enough even in the government sector. Large number of positions go a-begging, although in theory there is this much % of reservation, but that is hardly filled, except in some of the top few jobs. So yes, there is a serious case for doing much better in the government sector, but increasingly, as you know, government sector is a very small sector. Even of the organized sector jobs, it is less than half of the organized sector. Private sector is the most happening place. It is the expanding place. It is the place of future opportunities. Government jobs in any case are turning contractuals and so on. So we need to pay attention to private jobs as well. It needs to be brought within the purview of the overall national policy of social justice and affirmative action, but not in a hurry, not through crude instruments. We need sophisticated instruments in this particular sector.
Mr. Ved Jain, would you agree with what Yogendra Yadav is saying, that we need to look at some more sophisticated instruments to ensure that there is more inclusion? That right now, if you look at the private sector, the SC, ST and the backward classes are highly underrepresented.
I have a larger question to ask my all political friends and others who are participating in the debate. For what purposes we need reservation, whether we want their welfare in the right spirit and the right manner, or if we want to have a lip service where we want to show that we are doing something. India got a freedom in the year 1947, and reservation was meant to serve the purpose to uplift these peoples. Now in 1990, we opened our economy, and Indian economy is today a globalized economy, is a liberalized economy, and the private sector has to compete not within India, but globally it has to compete in India. And the private sector has been contributing all its might by way of direct and indirect taxes. A larger part of the budget, I will say major part of the budget, comes from this private sector, which contribute taxes, which generate employment. And the more and more the private sector will be successful, there will be more and more revenue, and the government will have more and more funds to spend for social welfare, for development, education, etc. Do we want to say that when we are going to the private sector that there should be a reservation? Are we admitting as a government, whether it is government of the day or of the government earlier year, that it has failed to uplift the peoples in the manner in which it was expected to do? And that's why now it is reaching out to the private sector. Please do us, because we have not been able to do it. The right way to do is that whatever taxes, one of the panelists said that the private sector is getting benefit by way of subsidy, by way of government or natural resources, etc. No doubt. In case these are being given in return, they are paying their taxes, they are creating employment, they are creating, I said, removing regional imbalances by going out the industry in that area. Now to put a condition further on a private sector that you need to employ, what we will end up is making that private sector also uncompetitive. India number in the ease of doing business globally has now increased because of certain measures taken where we are trying to make the industry competitive. By putting all these issues and then putting private sector also for a reservation, what we do is the ease of doing business will become more difficult and then we go down in the numbers. Idea should be to have more development of economy because that will create employment.
Well,
in case
I thought ease of doing business,
reserved, then you provide skills.
I thought ease of doing business was more to do with the government policies. I thought, Mr. Jain, ease of doing business was more to do with the business environment, with the kind of government policies that we have that enable you to grow your business. And to the other point that you're making, what is the point of being, successfully a competitive company which is flourishing and growing when you're not able to take everyone together? The point is that there has to be a progress for the entire nation, and the data that Yogendra Yadav was pointing out to show us that there is still a large percentage of people who are not getting enough in comparison to a very small percentage of people in the private sector who are getting a lot.
Collect taxes, collect taxes from the private sector, take money from them and use for their education, for development, for training.
Okay.
Provide them subsidy, give them the grant.
Okay.
But don't force the private sector to employ
Now, a lot of our panelists
because,
want to respond.
You are perpetuating the unemployment.
Got your point. Okay. A lot of our panelists want to respond. Yogendra Yadav, I see your hand. If you will just give me 2 minutes because I haven't gone across to Mr. Ashok Bharti and let's bring in his view, because the question that Ved Jain is asking tonight, Mr. Bharti, is why do we need reservation in the private sector? What is the purpose?
Thank you very much. Let me remind Mr. Jain that in 2006, the Confederation of Indian Industry and the ASSOCHAM, which he represents, promised to this country that they will voluntarily implement affirmative action. So that is the one that I don't know whether he was true to his words or now he is true to his words. That's the first thing that I wanted to make. It was their promises to the government of India, promise to the country, and they took credit for this, that they are implementing affirmative action voluntarily. So that is the one point that I wanted to make. I hope that Mr. Jain will respond to that and he will give us the figures and dates and details that how much affirmative action has been implemented by the member companies of the ASSOCHAM. Sir, let me complete.
Released in 2017.
He will come.
Yes, okay, he's responding to your question. Yes,
sir,
Mr.
let
Jain.
me complete, then you can come. Sir,
let him respond to this point of yours and then I will come back to you. Mr. Bharti, since you've asked a question, let Ved Jain respond to that. I will come back to you.
That is the one thing that I wanted to say.
I will come back to you. Let's listen into what he has to say. What has been done voluntarily since the assurances that were given by the industry in 2006, Mr. Jain?
Yeah. Second thing that I wanted to tell, I wanted to share with you
that clearly say that we will support education, we will support training, we will use CSR fund for development. It's already a paper released by ASSOCHAM on that issue. The industry has clearly says ki use the money, use our infrastructure for the purpose of their real development. Don't make them dependent permanently. So what happened by giving employment, we are not educating and we are not providing training. The issue is the skill development and training. Employment does not provide that skill development and that training. That's some important issue. There is a CSR now which is available with all corporate that can also be channelized for these purposes. But by putting this type of reservations, and what we will do is making the industry uncompetitive, and that will create a problem because now the industry has to compete worldly, globally. It's not that. It's not only in the Indian private sector. There are so many companies which come from abroad also.
One at a time, please. Gentlemen, one at a time.
I have not completed my argument. Yes. You are not giving fair chances.
I am coming back to you only, Mr. Bharti. Go ahead and finish your point. I am coming to you.
Yeah.
You asked a question. I got you an answer on that. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Yeah. The second thing that I wanted to make very clear, that scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, they number more than 300 million in this country, and they contribute 3 lakh crore rupees annually, and by the materials that is produced by the private sector industry. That is the one thing that I wanted to, and I'm sure that the industry is aware of this quantum of money that scheduled caste and scheduled tribe is spending in the market, and we want to understand that how they are going to serve their customer. That is the second point. The third point that I wanted to make, as soon as the issue of affirmative action or quota crops up, people consider that as if the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe are asking to provide jobs and opportunity to the undeserving people. We have been discussing this with the CII and various organizations. We have been telling, you tell us your meritorious criteria. You tell us your criteria to recruit the people. We will provide you the people with the desired quality, desired merit, and we are not asking you to recruit the people who doesn't fit your bill for the recruitment. So actually they want to hide their caste nepotism, which is massively prevalent in the industry.
Okay.
If you look at
Mr. Bharti, I take your point.
Company, you will find
let me
the
take
top
it across
management from the same community.
Let me take it across to our other panelists. Yogendra Yadav wanted to make a point. Go ahead, Mr. Yadav. And also to this last remark that was made by Mr. Bharti. Is there prevalent caste-based discrimination in our private sector even today?
I was disappointed to hear Mr. Jain, because I think Indians love to look at the US for all things. And I wonder why they don't look at the US when it comes to questions of racial discrimination and inclusive regime. The private sector and the debates about inclusion in the US are light years ahead of what Mr. Jain is saying. If he were to say what he said in the context of blacks in the US, I don't know how the newspapers tomorrow would report what he said. I don't think he would be able to sustain this argument even for half a minute if this was a slightly advanced debate. What he seems to be implying is that the moment the pool is expanded and you are pushed to include persons from disadvantaged background, the merit will drop. I find it preposterous argument. I'm sure he's not implying that there is a genetic defect. I'm sure he doesn't mean to say that there is a DNA deficiency in people who come from a different social background. What we are looking at is difference of opportunities. And as far as I know, and I've spoken to all kinds of employers, what they tell me is this, that most of the Indians who they employ, the BE engineers and others, they bring degrees, they don't bring too much skills. That's the sad part of our education system. And basically you have to train them afresh. Now my question is, if you can train people who have an engineering degree but from upper caste background, privileged background afresh, why not train others from another background? And as Mr. Ashok Bharti is saying, please do not dilute any of your criteria. Of course, fix a degree, tell me the marks. Fortunately, this country has a very large pool to offer. And as Mr. Ashok Bharti rightly says, there is sufficient evidence. There is an economics project. I would draw Mr. Jain's attention. This is a proper research project, thankfully done in collaboration with foreign scholars, so that would convince Mr. Jain and ilk, which shows that in Indian private corporate sector jobs, there is a systematic caste discrimination. And this was done through an experiment where caste names were changed, and the same biodata was submitted. And it shows, and this is a longitudinal study, which shows that there is a systematic caste-based discrimination in India. So an intervention needs to be made, and I'm saying intervention need not be quota and reservation on day one. No, it should not be that. So please do not try and convert this argument into a straw man and destroy it.
Okay.
Please face something real.
Right.
And as Mr. Ashok Bharti's intervention points out, there is a bad faith. The private sector promises we'll do this, we'll do that, then they go to sleep unless the government intervenes again. So the government intervention is necessary.
Okay, so before Mr. Jain responds to that, here is some data that I'm just putting out based on what was given by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment in December 2015. And that went on to say that over 2.5 lakh candidates from SC/ST tribes communities were trained in various vocational skills, that there were about 1,11,000 scholarships that were provided to SC/ST students. This is all affirmative action in private sector. That 100 entrepreneurship development training programs were held, that 925 companies had adopted the voluntary code of conduct. And this data goes on to speak about various sectors and what companies in various sectors have done. So, Mr. Yadav, are you saying that all of this still is on paper and that it's not really having an impact on ground with whatever steps the private sector is taking?
Tanvi, I would not believe that all the data is false. I would respect the data, but in a large country like India, please convert every data into percentages. The moment you say 1 lakh people were given this, sounds very impressive. And if you say in percentage term, it amounts to 0.78%, then it looks very different. So let's convert it into percentages. Let us see what is the proportion of jobs being given by the private sector today, and what proportion of that is influenced by any form of affirmative action. I'm willing to accept even the mildest form, and let us begin with the mildest. But are we doing even that? That is where the question of bad faith comes in, and I think something needs to be done. And I would really urge CII, please do not wait for the government to come and twist your arms. Please show that you want to do something on your own and not these little tokenist CSR things. You have to go much beyond that.
That is the operative part. And Mr. Ved Jain, it cannot be limited to a CSR activity. That's the point that we are making. A few smaller initiatives may look good on the company report card, but it has to be more than a CSR activity.
See, the issue which is being debated out is, see, what we are trying to make it out is that private sector is discriminating without there being anything such like this. See, the private sector today survives on a competitiveness, on a merit, and this is the requirement of the need of the industry and the job requirement. And I believe as the private sector has to operate in a competitive world, the choice of the private sector, how it makes it out. What my fellow speakers are trying to work it out is that based on certain statistical analysis, they are trying to make out a case that a certain particular caste or particular community is being left out, and that there should be a reservation for that particular caste or particular community. My only suggestion was that as a corporate, they have been doing well and they have been contributing to the exchequers, working it out. Whatever the money you want to generate from the corporate by way of taxes, etc., please help out that cost, that community to come it up to. See, the question is, there are two things. In case the corporate produces more, it will create more employment, which will be the ultimate benefit to the nation and to the society. Because in case the corporates are able to contribute and develop and economy arises, the benefit percolate down to everybody. What will happen is, see, my friend says, no, nothing, we want that it should be encouraged, etc. I have no issue with that purpose. But the problem is, then they say, no, put a reservation. The point is, when you put a mandatory reservation, it has to be by way of a statute or something like this. Meaning thereby, then you will say, yes, this corporate has to do in this particular manner, which will hamper the efficiency.
Why will it hamper the efficiency? Why can you not hold training programs where you train people?
You have the right to collect money
where
from
you
them.
Train people, you give them the training you need for your employee. Mr. Jain, how many of what percentage of engineers are actually learning what they need to do on the job in their colleges? 80% of our engineers from different branches still get placed in software companies. Now, do they really deserve it on meritorious basis? Because they all did not get the training in software. They all get training on the job. And if you are willing to do it, why will you not do it for everybody?
Give me a minute. Give me a minute. I'm posing a counter question.
Two questions. We have listened
Bhaskar
to the
Ghosh,
so please
Bhaskar
acknowledge
Ghosh.
two questions what I want to raise.
Yes, Bhaskar Ghosh.
Give me.
Yeah,
And then
I just want
Shailesh.
to have two questions.
Yeah.
Number one, it is addressed to Mr. Jain.
I just want to pose a question.
No, please. You'll include this
So
question
Mr.
in your
Bhaskar
answer.
Ghosh
Please
of the
include my
BJP
question
has
in your
a question
answers.
for you, Mr. Jain.
First
Bhaskar
is that-
Ghosh has a question for you.
yeah,
Let's
the
listen
first
to
is
that.
that
Yeah.
1 minute.
CII,
Give me 1 minute.
CII, ASSOCHAM, CII, ASSOCHAM and FICCI, they have signed a voluntary code of conduct. So what till date the private companies has done on this voluntary code of conduct? This is number one. I give an example. CII has given a figure. They have created 1.2 lakh jobs for SC/ST in 10 years. That means per year, they are just generating nothing more than 12,000 jobs per year. This is the latest figure given by your CII.
Give
now
me
the
one
question is,
question
if you are talking about
you.
so regarding the voluntary code of conduct,
Can you
where
give me 1
you are
minute?
standing today, can you inform us?
Yes, Mr. Jain.
Sure, please go ahead.
Can you give me 1 minute? Can you give me just 1 minute to raise a question?
Go ahead, please.
Tell me how many engineers which have qualified across India and whether those engineers got employment or not, or whether there is a discrimination while employing engineer because of the caste or the community. How many doctors got qualified and how many doctors not got employment because of the caste or community. How many MBA students got qualified and how much could not get because in the private sector because of caste community. I say there is no discrimination to that effect.
Okay,
The
so there are
problem
two
is that
aspects,
more and
Mr.
more
Jain.
engineers from those caste
Yes.
and those community need to come.
So there are two
more
aspects.
And more doctors need to come.
Affirmative action. I get your point. I get your point. Here is what I have to say to that. There are two aspects to why we must have affirmative action. It's not just to say we are battling discrimination. Of course, that exists and it still exists in many parts of our country in various aspects, public, private, society-wise. The other is to provide the opportunities. Affirmative action is to ensure that you're providing opportunities to those who for generations haven't got any opportunity. So even if you tell them that you will get admission into a school, you still have to ensure that they have the means to study, to give those exams and to clear and prepare for those exams. And it starts from there till every stage until they start earning. So that is the other aspect that we are talking about. Shailesh Singh wanted to make a point. Shailesh, the conversation and the debate right now is whatever it is that the private sector is doing, is it enough? If assurances have been given by the industry on affirmative action, is that being done?
No, I think that there's much more that can be done, and I'm sure that organizations accept that too. In fact, I'm very surprised at the comments coming from Mr. Jain, especially given that in many ways today organizations are adopting some form of quotas. Our women have been underprivileged for years. And if you go to a private sector organization today, I won't be able to recall even one where gender diversity is not an agenda. There are organizations that open jobs for women candidates first, and only if they're not able to find women candidates for those jobs is when they start looking for men. So there is that reservation, that quota that exists. Please
Yes,
let me finish. I did not interrupt while you were talking.
Gender equality is there, an issue.
So there is
yes.
that special treatment that exists even today. Organizations are looking at hiring underprivileged or specially abled people. And please remember, the data set that I quoted at the very beginning,
yes,
most
I do agree. We are looking also as an industry, we do look forward.
90% of the jobs that are open with them,
there is no issue about
which means 10 to 15% of the jobs are not going filled. So there's an opportunity on one hand where organizations want to hire more. There's an opportunity on another hand where a significant portion of our society, because of being underprivileged, is not able to make the cut. Why not invest there and bring them in and fill the supply problem as well? So to me, it's a win-win from both perspectives.
Okay,
I completely do not endorse the fact that you feel people will not be able to create a value, we'll lose our competitive edge. I think all those are arguments to shy away from taking concrete actions and making this a success.
Yogendra Yadav.
Actually, I just wanted to cite to Mr. Jain. I'm sure he would love to read this. There's a book from Oxford University Press, edited by Catherine Newman and Sukhdev Thorat, two economists, distinguished economists, on on discrimination on caste line that persist in jobs in the private sector in India. Please read it. We cannot have an argument just like that. I agree, I don't agree. I would again underline the fact that, Mr. Jain, the arguments that you are giving, these arguments used to be made about 30, 40 years ago. Today, it's embarrassing to share these arguments. As my friend Shailesh has just pointed out, these arguments have been made now in the case of women, in the case of disabled persons, in the case of socially and economically disadvantaged sections. So let us have a sophisticated conversation. Let's not go on to say, oh, we face competition, oh, we are meritorious. These things have been argued. No one is saying you don't need to be competitive. But please, if you push the argument the way you are pushing it, it actually might sound much worse than you think it sounds. So let's grow up. Let's have some sophisticated and serious argument. If we are sincere about addressing this, the way you're pushing this argument unfortunately brings your organization in a very, very poor light. Anyone listening to this would feel, oh, this organization is not serious at all about doing. I'm sure this is not the impression you want to give of your organization.
Okay. So let's bring in the other view also. And Vivin Sharan wants to come in right now. Vivin, do you have a counter view to this? At the end of the day, for companies, is it just about profitability and nothing more?
Yeah, some affirmative action on this panel is good to begin with. I think while I agree with Mr. Yadav's view that disclosure is a first step towards greater transparency and effectiveness of affirmative action, I think we also need to look at reflexively what is the role of government here. And unlike the US, our government organizations and administrators in particular are not adept at understanding economic exigencies or empathizing with industry, as the case may be. And therefore, the first thing that we need to understand is that there is a need for administrative reform, whether it means devolution of administrative powers, whether it means increase in administrative capacity, for the process of measurement and calibration. What are we going to do with this disclosure? It's going to become like one of those energy disclosure projects that we used to have when we cared about climate change. We had a lot of disclosure that didn't necessarily lead us off the beaten path or off the trajectory that we were already on of industry commitment or lack thereof. Therefore, for government to fulfill a regulatory role, which is not a binary role, it is a spectrum. We have to figure out a greater governmental capacity to be able to govern affirmative action. And that means, for instance, very concretely, sending people to the Delhi-Mumbai industry corridor instead of sitting in Udyog Bhavan. And if we can start somewhere there, we reach closer to a place where we actually have some impact on the ground, because everything is about outcomes today. So are academic studies. If you have to create outcome-based indicators, there's no way to do so unless we have a regulatory form of governance, unlike a binary or a punitive form.
Okay, I have a question that I'm picking up from our viewers who are also sending us messages right now. And Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh, maybe you can take this question. When we are sitting here and discussing affirmative action and perhaps quota for the SC, ST in the private sector, where do you draw the line? Look what is happening when it comes to reservation in government jobs. So one after the other, you have more communities who are standing up and saying, we also deserve it, we also want it, we are also now struggling within our state. And you see state governments give in one after the other. So where do you draw the line as to who gets this reservation and who doesn't?
Well, primarily, what I've started discussions that the primary role or primary objective of government to create a level playing field. And to create a level playing field, we have to assess the in terms of their strength and weakness of their respective categories, and based on that we'll provide them the sufficient we can say protections. And as I said earlier, the protection is not always a reservation. The protection is also in terms of empowerment, in terms of giving them the scholarships, giving them the skills, getting them, imparting them with the right skills. So it's a holistic programs. You cannot say that, okay, in OBC you give this much, or SC, ST you give this much and this much. This is not a straight line formulas. As our leader, Mr. Shastri says, that Congress for the last 40 years has done nothing to it. And our government is trying to do something which is very fundamental. And it is not that we have just given, and we are talking about skills. I have just listening, Mr. Jain is monotonously, he was telling that it's a skill. Don't forget, this country is run by the two heads who are from the, again, OBC and who are from the backward classes, the president, the prime ministers. So there is no lack of skill, there is no lack of talent amongst all these people who are really been deprived over the past 70 years. But what you have to do is to improvise them, showcase them properly, and just to give them the equal opportunity to fight.
All
so
right.
what we are talking about,
I get your point. I'm sorry I have to interrupt you, but
indiscriminate reservation to them. We are talking about the creating a level playing field for them, and then allow them to fight with our all odds, and whomsoever is meritorious
no outright
will be shining
indiscriminate reservation, but creating a level playing field, providing opportunities to everybody, and ensuring that there is a larger conducive atmosphere from education to skills training and to jobs. I thank all of our panelists for joining us this evening. This debate, of course, will continue. But from what we have learned amongst the various suggestions that the government is discussing and considering, perhaps some of them need to be brought in right now to create that level playing field, to provide opportunities. I just want to read out one set of data. The marginalized social groups constitute almost 3/4. 9% of ST, 19% of ST, and 44% of OBC of India's population as per the 2012 census. That's the percentage in terms of population. But if you speak about percentage in terms of poverty level, then the poverty level amongst the scheduled castes is 43%, scheduled tribes 29%, OBC 21%, significantly higher than the upper caste 13% as of 2011 and 12. It is this inequality that has to go away, and the government of the day must ensure that everything at every level is done to do away with this. Yes, overnight reservations perhaps in any sector, in any one isolated vertical may not be the solution. But steps have to be taken, doors have to be opened, conversations have to be made. Thank you so much for joining us on this debate.